Welcome everyone to Marvel Hub. This is DK Dynamite, and today we're going to be talking about the various plot holes and inconsistencies that I personally wasn't a fan of within Avengers Endgame. So first, let's jump into the discussion about the Infinity Stones. So starting off with the Soul Stone. Now we all know you must kill that which you love in order to gain access to the Soul Stone, as we saw Thanos do within Infinity War when he sacrificed Gamora. Now we also know that the Red Skull was freed after Thanos gained access to the Soul Stone, since the Red Skull no longer had to guard it. The Russo brothers confirmed that in an interview about, I would say, 7 to 8 months ago. And obviously the Red Skull was freed off screen, so we weren't sure whether or not he would return in Avengers Endgame in some capacity after Thanos had gained access to the Soul Stone. So it turns out in Endgame, we actually don't see the Red Skull post Infinity War. Instead, we're obviously going back in time using the quantum realm, and Clint and Natasha argue over who is to sacrifice himself for the Soul Stone, and the Red Skull is there once again just to give the same speech as he gave Thanos, and once again he's freed off screen, so we don't see much of him after the Soul Stone is collected. But my big question is, how does Steve Rogers actually return the Soul Stone to Vormir, since at the end of the film he goes on a little mission that only takes a couple of seconds in real time to return the Infinity Stones and Mjolnir to their proper places in time, so that he doesn't affect other timelines. Now obviously when he originally, along with the other Avengers, collected the Infinity Stones and Mjolnir from previous points in time, those items were only gone for approximately a second in those timelines, while we obviously had it in our prime timeline for the duration of the movie. So when Steve goes back at the end to return the Soul Stone, how exactly can you return the Soul Stone to Vormir? And if the Red Skull isn't there anymore, then who is to guard it? So the big question is, when and if Steve returns the Soul Stone to Vormir, does that bring Natasha back to life, since it's now no longer taking a soul for a soul and is instead replacing a soul for a soul? So it's a bit of a weird conversation to have in regards to what happens to the Soul Stone, but in my opinion it's almost a missed opportunity in Endgame when Cap doesn't come face to face with the Red Skull throughout the movie, and instead of Cap and Black Widow meeting up with the Red Skull to gain the Soul Stone, it's just Clint and Black Widow. So I definitely understand the reasoning why they chose Clint and Black Widow to go on that mission, but it really does suck that Cap didn't get to encounter the Red Skull at least one more time before the end of his character arc. And in terms of the Red Skull will ever return in future MCU movies, that's up for debate at this moment in time. But now that the Soul Stone is apparently returned back to the Towers of Vormir, does that mean that Adam Warlock will now have access to the Soul Stone as he does in the comics, or is this truly the end of the Infinity Stones appearing in MCU movies, since Endgame and Far From Home are technically the end of the Infinity Saga / Phase 3? Not sure how that's going to work, but remember, the Infinity Stones in our current timeline, the main timeline, are destroyed, but obviously when Steve went to put them back where they belong in the past, that is just so that the disappearance of the Infinity Stones in those timelines doesn't dramatically change those timelines overall. But either way, in our main timeline, the Infinity Stones are gone. They were destroyed by Thanos, so I guess that means it's the end, or maybe Adam Warlock somehow gains access to the Soul Stone in a different way in the past. Not sure how that's going to work. Maybe he explores the quantum realm himself in a future MCU movie. We just don't know as of right now. But maybe Black Widow could return. Maybe she did return off screen or some sort. Maybe somehow when Cap returned the Soul Stone to Vormir, it brings Black Widow back. We just don't know the rules just yet as to how returning the Soul Stone could dramatically change the MCU. But for the next Infinity Stone, we have the Space Stone, or the Tesseract. How did Steve return it to its proper place in Tesseract form? Obviously it goes from Tesseract, or the cube, to the tiny Space Stone, and then I guess it's supposed to somehow go back to the Tesseract / cube form. Is it possible for it to change form itself, on its own, or how exactly does that work? Because it just doesn't make sense if you think about it. In Infinity War, Thanos breaks the Tesseract to get the Space Stone, so is it even possible to somehow make that Space Stone look like a Tesseract again? I just don't know how that works, but once again, these things will probably be answered in interviews post official release of Avengers Endgame, when the Russo brothers sit down to answer some questions from the fans and from interviewers, stuff like that. So I also want to talk about the Reality Stone and how it was extracted from Jane Foster in this film by Thor and Rocket, of course, and obviously it was in the form of the Aether within Thor the Dark World. So is it possible to make the Reality Stone look like the Aether again, as it previously did? So it just sucks that we didn't get to see Steve actually go on this tiny mission and, you know, essentially return these stones. I hope it's a deleted scene one day where they kind of show how he ends up placing them back in their proper points in time. But it kind of sucked that in Infinity War we didn't get to see Thanos change the Aether into the Reality Stone either. That was actually something I really wanted to see, because the Aether or the Reality Stone in Thor the Dark World was really different from the way that Thanos used it in Infinity War. So obviously in Infinity War and Endgame, the Reality Stone is used in the way that it should be used, and it really does live up to the name of the Reality Stone. But in Thor the Dark World, the Aether itself was just such a different instrument or tool for Malekith to use throughout that movie, when it really didn't change reality all that much, even though it kind of defied the laws of physics and messed with gravity a little bit at the beginning of the movie when Jane Foster saw those kids messing around with it. So the next topic I wanted to talk about was the 14 million outcomes that Doctor Strange described within Infinity War, and how we originally looked at time travel in a much different way before Endgame released. But the way it's described in Endgame is that no matter what you do in the past, when you travel there using the quantum realm, it won't affect your current timeline or your future, but instead it just creates alternate timelines, and you're essentially changing the timeline for those other realities and for those other versions of yourselves. So the only point in returning the Infinity Stones at the end of Avengers Endgame is so that it doesn't dramatically change and screw up those alternate timelines. So it's almost just gratitude or a good deed or decency to return the stones where they belong, just so that those timelines don't play out in such a chaotic way that is massively different from your timeline. So that's the explanation we have right now. I'm sure the Russo brothers and the writers and other people who produced the movie will come to explain that a little bit more, either in interviews or in future MCU movies. But looking at that logic, it just feels a little bit like a cop-out that in the one outcome where we win against Thanos, it's just because Tony ends up snapping away Thanos using the gauntlet. But in all the other outcomes and realities and timelines, we essentially always lose just because Tony doesn't snap his fingers and essentially sacrifice himself. So I really did think there was going to be a little more depth behind Doctor Strange's words in Infinity War. Maybe he had a secret plan, he cursed the time stone, or he somehow sent himself in the future to set up a chain of events. I was really expecting something like that to happen, but instead it really just meant that he saved Tony's life at the end of Infinity War just so he could sacrifice himself later, since apparently that was the only way to defeat Thanos and the Infinity Gauntlet. So I can't say I'm disappointed with that. I'm just going to say I expected a little bit more depth and a little bit more weight with Doctor Strange's words about those alternate outcomes. So essentially in every timeline of events, they lose just because Tony doesn't sacrifice himself. But in our main timeline, in the MCU that we all know and love, Tony has to die in order to defeat Thanos. But in reality, anybody could have wore the gauntlet to snap away Thanos in an army. Anybody could have wore the gauntlet to essentially fix the problem itself, but for some reason, just because of the plot force, as I call it, Tony had to be the one to do it, because that was essentially the best send-off they could have gave Tony Stark or Iron Man here in the MCU. Now, I also wanted to talk about the fact that Gamora, or the Gamora that we wanted to return, doesn't actually make an appearance in this movie. So the Gamora that was sacrificed for the Soul Stone doesn't get revived here in Avengers Endgame, which makes us question whether or not Black Widow could ever return from the Soul Stone in the future of the MCU. So instead of the Gamora that we all know and love from Guardians 1 and 2, Infinity War, instead of that Gamora returning, we instead get a Gamora from pre-Guardians 1, the Gamora that was still working under Thanos, and we get to see her a little bit within this film as she's slowly breaking free from the slavery she's essentially under for Thanos, and as she's coming to that realization that she he can now break free from his reign, past Nebula essentially tries to kill her, and that's when the good Nebula from the present actually kills off that past Nebula to prevent Gamora's death in 2014. Now keep in mind, as we talked about earlier, no matter what Nebula changed in the past, it will not affect the present, doesn't affect the timeline we all know and love. This timeline stays intact, but that obviously created an alternate timeline where Nebula in the past, in 2014, actually dies, which dramatically changes how Gamora will eventually come to meet the Guardians. So now at the end of Endgame, the Guardians along with Thor are going to go on a journey to find that 2014 version of Gamora. Now it's unclear if Peter thinks they can end up finding the same Gamora that was sacrificed for the Soul Stone, or if he does know that the only Gamora left is the one from pre-Guardians 1. But what's weird about that logic too is, technically, couldn't they go back in time to pick up Gamora from right before Thanos is about to sacrifice her? Because if they do that, it won't dramatically change anything, except for the fact that maybe that Thanos in that timeline will be upset that he has no one to sacrifice, so maybe that would almost lead Thanos to come into our timeline trying to fuck shit up to find Gamora. So maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe they can't actually save Gamora from a timeline right before Thanos is about to sacrifice her. That might dramatically change things for that Thanos, leading him to then come into our Prime universe to kind of take her back. So with that being said, maybe there is no way to bring back the Gamora we all know and love. Maybe there is no way to bring back the Gamora who's already gone through all that character development with the Guardians, with Peter. So maybe the only option is somehow gaining access to the Gamora from 2014. Since obviously in that timeline, when we see her in the movie, that Thanos from 2014 is of course snapped away and killed at the end of Endgame. So there would be no Thanos in 2014 to go on the journey for the Infinity Stones, to sacrifice Gamora. So in a sense, Gamora from 2014 is free, and there's no way Thanos could ever kill her since that Thanos is dead. So in Guardians 3, does that mean that the Guardians and Thor will now be on a journey to rescue that Gamora, to kind of show her who she is? But does that take away a lot of screen time for what they can actually be exploring in Guardians 3, like Adam Warlock, the old school Guardians, and other plot points that we're all expecting? Is it taking away screen time? That is the golden question, because they could take maybe 30 minutes, maybe just an act or two, to kind of convince Gamora of who she is, turn her to the bright side, and kind of have her fall in love again with Peter. Or will they waste a majority of the movie, if not all of it, trying to reestablish a relationship with Gamora, even though she's already been through 2 full films of character development on top of kind of expressing her love for Peter within Infinity War before she's sacrificed? So it's kind of a weird gray area where it could work, you know, in a phenomenal way, where James Gunn kind of rewrites Gamora's history a little bit and still kind of has her on the team, still has her fall in love with Peter, while at the same time it's like, wait, isn't that going to waste screen time? Instead of focusing on a meaningful way to end the Guardians trilogy, you're kind of having to reestablish and recover certain things with Gamora, and, you know, finding a family, feeling comfortable with them again, even though we've already been through that in 2 other Guardians movies. So let me know what you think of that down below in the comments section. So getting towards the end of this list here, I wanted to talk about Steve Rogers and the fact that people are really upset that somehow Steve is okay leaving the current timeline behind, going to the past and kind of rewriting his own history and living his life out with Peggy, while on the sidelines he's kind of letting everything else play out with Hydra, with the Winter Soldier, with all these events that happen in American history. Is it really his character to let all that stuff happen? Now, all I'm going to say about that is, who are we to say that in the past that Cap travels to live his life out with Peggy, who are we to say that he doesn't go ahead and change all of those events that we're all talking about? What if he actually does change everything? What if he does make a better life for Bucky and prevents Hydra from infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D.? What if he actually does that off screen? Then he returns to our current timeline for the sole reason of passing his shield on to Sam after he's been through even more in that past alternate timeline. But either way, no matter what he changes in the past with Peggy, it will not affect the current timeline timeline, our present timeline, or our present MCU. No matter what Cap does in the past, it won't change anything. So who are we to say that off screen Cap doesn't go ahead and change everything that he wanted to and would have wanted to if he would have lived through that time? Maybe he did do that. Maybe the Russo brothers will confirm that in an upcoming interview where they talk about how him going to the past changes everything. Maybe that does happen, or maybe for the sake of the war being over, Captain America is now just Steve Rogers, living a normal life that he always wanted to live. As he says, he always wanted what Tony had, which was a normal family, a normal life outside of being an Avenger. Maybe it is time for him to have that after laying his life down so many times, almost sacrificing himself so many times for the greater good. Maybe it's time to put down the shield once and for all and live the normal life that he wanted. Maybe that's how it really ends. Maybe he doesn't change things in the past, but either way, I think it's a fitting end for Steve's character. Maybe death would have been more suitable for the fan theories and for the hardcore fans who expect a little bit more, but I still think this ending does fit his character, because either way, it's left open to interpretation as to whether or not he does change things in the past. But either way, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because it doesn't change the current timeline of events, and he simply comes back to our current timeline just to pass the torch over to Sam. Now, I also want to talk about the Hulk a little bit in this video and how I feel like he was a little underutilized in Infinity War and Endgame. So I felt like in Infinity War they spent a lot of time kind of building up this level of hype that would say, you know what, Hulk was kind of sidelined throughout Infinity War, but he's definitely going to make a comeback in Endgame. Don't worry guys, he has a big rematch coming with Thanos, and despite not having that rematch that we all hoped for, I was at least hoping for a good explanation as to how Professor Hulk comes to be. I was seeing some great fan theories, some really cool fake leaks out there that were suggesting that Bruce Banner would accompany the team when they first go look for Thanos in the first act, and maybe Thanos tries using the Mind Stone on Bruce Banner, but instead of controlling the Hulk, it somehow merges both him and the Hulk to become Professor Hulk. That was a great theory that somebody came up with, but obviously none of that happened in the first act. Thanos doesn't even use the gauntlet in the first act. Obviously he destroyed the stones along with it, so it was a bit disappointing to hear that the off-screen explanation for Bruce bringing the Hulk back out is that he experimented with more gamma radiation to kind of have the best of both worlds. And the Hulk obviously is a little smaller in this movie, but I was hoping for at least one good fight scene with him, but it was never said whether or not Mark Ruffalo was done with the MCU after this movie. It really seems like Endgame was a send-off for Tony Stark and Captain America, maybe even Black Widow, depending on how they handle her prequel movie coming out soon. But other than that, we have plenty of room left for character development for characters like Thor, the Hulk, maybe even a little bit of Hawkeye and his TV show coming up. So I'm not too worried about the future of the Hulk, but people were suggesting that the Russo brothers have a hard time dealing with overpowered characters in their films, and the fact that they kind of built up so much level of hype with the Hulk in Infinity War and kind of getting us to that anticipation level of, yeah, the Hulk's definitely returning in Endgame, the fact that they did that and didn't really deliver on that note is a bit disappointing. But maybe it was done for a reason, because he'll be more utilized in some upcoming movies. Maybe Disney has repaired the relationship a little bit with Universal, so we could have more solo Hulk films and more team-ups in the future. We'll just have to wait and see how that exactly will work. But speaking of overpowered characters, this is the one thing that I am absolutely extremely disappointed about when it comes to Endgame. It's the fact that Vision wasn't mentioned or seen throughout Endgame. So I was really expecting to see a Vision that looked exactly like the dead Vision we had at the end of Infinity War, who almost looks lifeless, has no color, has white eyes, similar to the cartoon where he doesn't have the Mind Stone, but is instead purely AI that is slowly turning into something close to a hybrid between a human and AI, something that's really full of emotions in a way that's kind of artificial, but in a way that creates some really good narrative with Scarlet Witch and some of those comics that they're featured in together. So I was really expecting that in Endgame, and even if we don't get exactly what we want, we still get something close to that, right? But we didn't even get a mention of Vision, so it's a bit disappointing to think that the only future we have left for Vision may not even be in an MCU film for a long time, but instead they're saving all of that for the TV show called WandaVision. So since the Mind Stone has been returned to that other timeline in the past, and there is no Mind Stone in the present since Thanos obviously destroyed it, that means that there is no Mind Stone left to put in Vision's head to revive him. We may never see the same Vision we all know and love from Age of Ultron, Civil War, Infinity War. We may never see that Vision again, so we're really depending on this Disney Plus show to go in depth as to what happens to Vision post Infinity War, since we're hoping that it's not going to be this prequel that takes place in between Civil War and Infinity War. Maybe there'll be some flashbacks to that. That'll be great to kind of build up the narrative, but hopefully it really goes in depth with kind of reconnecting with Vision post the decimation. But like I said, we're really depending on the Disney Plus show to go in depth with that, since it may be a while before we ever see Vision in an MCU movie ever again, which does suck when you think about it. But Scarlet Witch is obviously the best person to kind of have a chance at bringing that Vision back, since obviously her powers are connected to the Mind Stone, which means that she somehow has capabilities to maybe bring his memories back, bring out the life back in him. But as I was saying, I was almost hoping for some type of appearance in Endgame where he looks like he does in the cartoon, where he has the white eyes, where he's not really close to human, he's more of an AI. I was hoping to see a glimpse of that in the movie, just so that we have a pretty smooth transition into the show WandaVision and we know what to expect. But we're kind of left in the dark as to what happens to him. Obviously, Wanda is super OP at the end of the movie when she fights Thanos. She's super pissed off, you can definitely tell, but she's definitely not evil in any way. She's just very upset as to what Thanos took from her. But I am really looking forward to that show. I'm probably going to say it's my most anticipated Disney Plus show next to the Loki one, coming out in November, sometime after that as well. I believe some shows are coming out at launch on November 12th for Disney Plus when it releases, and some other shows will be releasing later on throughout the year. So as we get very close to the end of this list here, I also wanted to bring up the fact that Thanos and his fight feeling a little cheap towards the end. So I can't say I'm the biggest fan of the Avengers fighting a 2014 version of Thanos who hasn't gone on his journey, who hasn't collected the Infinity Stones, who hasn't sacrificed Gamora, who's never even met the Avengers. I can't say I'm a big fan of that because it feels like there's no weight to that fight. There's no emotion. There's just no life in that fight, since the Thanos we're fighting is just another version of Thanos that has no idea what the hell's going on. And that's expressed very well when Wanda tells him that he took everything from her and he's like, I've never met you before. So stuff like that is just a perfect example. Maybe that was their intention, and I guess that's fine, but I really wanted a Thanos that's been through it all, that was pissed off, that was mourning Gamora, to go off against the Avengers. I really wanted to see that, and I guess you could say it was a bit of a cop-out that they kind of nerfed his character a little bit by just killing off that Thanos post-decimation in the first act. I really wasn't expecting that, and that was actually featured in one of the old leaks that we read off here on this channel, in which I immediately said didn't make sense, because why would they go through all this time, this big journey in Infinity War, to build up Thanos' character, to give him some life, to give him emotion for the journey he was going on, only to kill that Thanos off right at the beginning of the film with almost no payoff to the decimation, with almost no repercussions to what he did. He just becomes too weak after the snap. We don't get much character development. He just dies knowing that he won. He accomplished what he wanted. We don't get much character development with him almost regretting what he did, mourning Gamora, some more Soul Stone action with him talking to younger Gamora. We don't get any more of that. He just dies thinking that he won and that there was no way for the Avengers to reverse it. He didn't anticipate that the Avengers would go through time using the quantum realm, get their own gauntlet, reverse what he did, and then kind of move forward from there. But if you think about it, looking at the end here, Thanos still won because they didn't go back in time like they could have and went to maybe the point right before the first decimation happened and reversed it, but instead they stuck with that 5-year time skip, brought everybody back. But are they coming back to a decent world? The people who died and have come back after maybe a few seconds before they died, because obviously when they got snapped, it was only a few seconds later that they actually came back in real time, to them of course, but to us it was 5 years. So what world are they really coming back to? A shitty economy, even more death because of the decimation. They're coming back to a really dark world that I'm sure Spider-Man Far From Home and future MCU movies will really touch on, but in a way Thanos still accomplished something. He caused a lot of damage, pretty much did limit the population a little bit. Even when the people were returned from the Soul Stone, he still did, limit the populations a little bit by causing chaos, destruction, homicide, all types of crimes because of the snap itself. And not just 1 year, not just 1 month, not just half a year of hell, but 5 years of hell because of decimation. People do return to their loved ones if they're still alive, but look at all the damage he caused because of it. And the Avengers could have definitely reversed, that 5-year time skip. They could have went back in time and did different things, but because Tony had a daughter, that was the plot they used to defend why they weren't gonna kind of go back 5 years and repair everything before all the decimation shit happened. But instead, they just let all that play through because of Tony's daughter. I guess that's a decent plot point to go with. I guess that's the plot force there for Tony's daughter. They stick with that. They live with the 5 years that they went on after decimation, and they just go from there. So it's a pretty bold choice from the writers, but I can't say I'm a fan of what seems like a cop-out final battle with a Thanos who hasn't done anything, who hasn't gone on his journey. He doesn't even know who he's fighting. All he knows is that this group of people who are defending Earth have a gauntlet with the stones, which makes his life hell of a lot easier. He doesn't have to go on his big journey, doesn't have to sacrifice anybody. He can just take the gauntlet from them and try to snap his fingers, but obviously it doesn't work, and we get the big sacrifice by Tony, and so on. So a bit of a weird choice for an ending, in my opinion. I can't say I'm the biggest fan of it because so many other things went through my mind when I was making theories about the Avengers Endgame final act, but I guess they kind of wanted to subvert expectations, go completely against what everybody was theorizing about, similar to The Last Jedi for the Star Wars franchise, which I'll make a separate video about later on, kind of comparing Endgame and subverting expectations to Last Jedi and how that film by Rian Johnson also subverted expectations. But last but definitely not least, wanted to bring up the idea of the Falcon and Winter Soldier TV show and how now that Cap passed the torch over to Sam or Falcon and how that impacts that show that is to come, because the show is called Falcon and Winter Soldier, but is he really still the Falcon? Is he actually Captain America in the show, but they didn't want to reveal it just yet? It's kind of unclear, but if I had to assume, based on the title that we have right now, the show will kind of focus on not only Falcon and Winter Soldier's relationship, some cool team-ups, some cool scenes, but it'll also focus on the transition from Falcon to Captain America. So by the end of that limited time show, by the end of that 10-episode run or so, Falcon will truly be the new Captain America. He'll make Bucky proud, and for future MCU films, when we see Sam, he will be Captain America versus having to establish that in a separate movie, which to me is pretty smart thinking because they can push the narrative pretty damn fast with these shows so that when these movies come out, it's up to the fans to kind of keep up with Disney Plus to understand some of those plot points in phase 4, 5, and 6, and so on. So the fact that Bucky wasn't chosen to be the new Captain America makes a lot of sense to me in terms of Steve's character arc, in terms of what everything Bucky has been through. Bucky has been through hell and back. He's been revived. He's been revitalized. He's been rebooted as a character a little bit. And he's been through so damn much throughout phases 1, 2, and 3 that it almost seems like Steve was like, you know what? You've earned your time to rest. You really put in a lot. I've helped you through everything. You were going through hell and you deserve some time off. You deserve a chance to live a normal life since you really haven't had a chance to do that yet. Whereas Sam is kind of just getting started as an Avenger. He's been through a little bit with the Avengers, but as the Falcon, he's been through quite a bit, but nowhere near as much as Bucky or Cap has been through. And I think in terms of Sam's character arc, he has a lot of life and missions left in him, to the point where him becoming the new Captain America makes a lot of sense. Obviously it happened a little bit different in the comics under different circumstances, but Sam is a good fit for the next Captain America, and I think Cap sees that Bucky deserves a normal life. He deserves to kind of step away for a little bit and to be himself, figure out who he really is now that he's free of all the Hydra shit and all the stuff he's been through in Winter Soldier and Civil War. Now that he's past all that, I think it's time for him to kind of step back, kind of tap out for a little while, and just be a normal person instead of having to fight all these wars like Steve was doing throughout the first 3 phases. So when it comes to Sam, I really do think there's massive potential for this arc, and as I was saying, it's a perfect opportunity to push a lot of little narratives forward, like with Vision and Sam becoming Captain America, through these Disney Plus shows, so that the movies don't have to waste screen time on this development. They can immediately jump in right into the action, and they can establish new character arcs and these villains, and the movies could do so much more now now because these Disney Plus shows exist, and because these Disney Plus shows are going to be focusing on these little plot threads that don't have much time to unravel throughout some of these big blockbuster movies. But that's about it for this massive video. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys did stick around for the entire thing, we pretty much broke down the entirety of Avengers Endgame and the things that people have the most questions about going forward with the MCU. I am going to have a separate video talking about how Spider-Man Far From Home could be impacted by the decimation, by the 5-year time skip, how it fits in with Phase 3 now. I'll have a separate video talking about that because there's a lot to dive into that I think would make this video probably 40 minutes long. But thank you so much for sticking around. If you guys have, let me know all your thoughts down below in the comment section. I'll respond to you guys as quick as I can. This has been DK Dynamite. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn notifications on to stay up to date with latest and greatest Marvel news and information. And peace out, everyone.